In the winter of 1971, the skies over the Indo-Pak border were a highly lethal airspace. Surviving an aerial dogfight often meant ejecting directly into hostile territory, where the physical crash was only the beginning of the danger. On December 10th, Flight Lieutenant Dilip Parulkar was flying a Sukhoi 7 jet, like the one seen in this photograph, when an anti-aircraft shell tore through his aircraft over the Pakistani city of Safarwal. He ejected and hit the ground heavily injured. Within moments, an angry local mob surrounded him, tearing at his uniform and beating him until he lost consciousness. Parulkar was saved only when Pakistani soldiers pushed through the crowd, recognizing that a live pilot was a valuable intelligence asset. He survived the crash, but Parulkar was now locked inside the heavily fortified Rawalpindi prisoner of war camp, entirely cut off from his nation. Inside, Pakistani intelligence subjected him to immediate psychological pressure. They kept him in a dark, solitary cell, deprived him of sleep, and repeatedly demanded the structural layout of critical Indian air bases. This diagram illustrates how Parulkar countered them. When forced, under threat of execution, to sketch the vital Udhampur airfield, he drew a highly detailed, completely fake map that actually mirrored the civilian runways of the Mumbai airport. Weeks later, on Christmas Day, the camp's commander allowed the prisoners a brief gathering. There, they learned India had won the war, but the men also realized that negotiating the release of tens of thousands of prisoners could drag on for years. Parulkar refused to wait for politicians to negotiate his freedom. He believed that when a soldier is captured, his active duty doesn't end. His primary objective immediately shifts to breaking out. He recruited two young, unmarried pilots, M.S. Grewal and Harish Sinhji. Through careful observation and building a superficial rapport with the guards, they managed to get themselves transferred to cell number 4, which sat close to the prison's outer boundary. Between freedom and the pilots stood an 18-inch thick, solid brick wall. Working from midnight to 1 a.m. every night, they took turns painstakingly scraping away the tough mortar, using nothing but a pair of borrowed scissors and a stolen screwdriver. To cover the scraping sounds, they cranked up the volume on a small radio. Every ounce of excavated brick and plaster was carefully swept up and hidden inside empty Red Cross care package boxes shoved under their beds. This diagram shows how they solved their navigation problem. Using a radio battery, they magnetized a sewing needle to create a compass. They then suspended this needle inside a hollowed-out fountain pen, allowing it to easily pass daily guard inspections. Over several months, they pooled their meager prisoner allowances to stockpile condensed milk and dry fruits. They even paid a local tailor to sew civilian Pathan suits from old clothes, turning a bleak prison cell into a fully functional staging ground. The ideal window opened on the night of August 13, 1972. A severe thunderstorm rolled over Rawalpindi, and because the next day was Pakistan's Independence Day, the guard rotation was noticeably relaxed. Taking their chance, the three men pulled out the loose bricks, crawled through the tight 18-inch hole, and crept into the torrential rain. The heavy downpour forced the nearest guard to cover his face with a blanket, allowing the pilots to slip right past him and vault over the outer perimeter. To blend into the urban environment seen in this photograph of the 1970s Pakistani street, they adopted new aliases, including Philip and Harold, and planned to present themselves as Christians to avoid suspicion if forced to recite Islamic prayers. Moving through the rain, they caught a local bus and rode all the way to Peshawar. From Peshawar, their target was the Afghan border. They referenced a map from a smuggled atlas and decided to navigate through a waypoint marked near the crossing, a railway station called Landi Khana. At a tea stall near the border, the men asked for directions to Landi Khana. They were met with confusion. The British had permanently closed that railway station in 1932, 40 years before the pilots ever stepped into the camp. Because they were asking for a landmark that hadn't existed for decades, a local government clerk immediately flagged them as outsiders. A crowd quickly gathered, and the men were handed over to local authorities, undoing months of meticulous physical preparation. Once their true identities were discovered, the Pakistani military transferred them back to Rawalpindi for 30 days of grueling solitary confinement before moving them to a larger holding facility. They spent several more months in captivity until December 1972. Following intense international negotiations, Pakistani President Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, pictured here at the microphones, formally announced the release of all Indian prisoners of war. Walking through the Wagah border gates shown in this photograph, Parulkar, Grewal, and Sinhji finally stepped back onto Indian soil. Thousands of cheering citizens lined the road, throwing flowers and celebrating their return. A few months after settling back home, Flight Lieutenant Parulkar requested a meeting with the Indian Air Chief, PC Lal, to hand him a small, unassuming gift. It was a standard fountain pen. But when the Air Chief pulled off the cap, he found the tiny, hand-magnetized needle compass suspended perfectly inside the ink chamber. Parulkar returned home via a political treaty, but the pen remains the physical record of an escape that was engineered and executed long before the final gates opened. It stands as evidence of a mission that security walls alone could never fully contain.
If you value clarity over chaos, explore more on Clear Lens X.